Travis was nearly done restoring the barn when he spotted it. Brand new floorboards hiding a rusted hatch no one mentioned. When he asked Mabel, the quiet old woman who paid him just enough to get by, she only said, "Some memories are best buried." But inside her worn-down home were priceless antiques, rare books, and a painting worth a fortune. What happened next will shock even those who think they've seen it all. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Travis Malone didn't talk much anymore. Not since the day the highway took his wife, nor the weeks that followed when the mortgage company took their home. The silence wasn't cold or bitter. It was the silence of a man holding the seams of his world together with calloused fingers and a quiet kind of grit. He woke up before dawn each morning, the sound of frost crackling on the metal roof of the trailer like a reminder that time was running out. Emily, always wrapped in 3 layers of second-hand pajamas, never complained. She knew they didn't have much, but she had him, and he had her. That counted for something, even if it didn't show up in the bank account. He kept a list on the fridge, handwritten in thick block letters. Gas, milk, bread, rent. Every week the order changed. Rent slipped further down. Milk got crossed off. Travis had started skipping meals, telling Emily he wasn't hungry, but his belt said otherwise. Some nights when she was asleep, he'd sit on the front steps and stare out at the empty cornfields, hands trembling slightly as he held an old photo of his wife, Samantha, taken at their wedding, her in white lace, him in a borrowed suit. He whispered apologies to the wind. Not for anything he'd done, but for not being able to give their daughter the life they'd planned together. The town wasn't what it used to be. The factory was long gone, the hardware store boarded up, and folks were either leaving or locked in their own quiet battles. The few jobs that popped up paid under the table, and most went to whoever could underbid everyone else. Travis took what he could. He fixed leaning fences, unclogged septic tanks, and once spent an entire weekend scraping pigeon droppings from a church steeple. No job was beneath him. Not anymore. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. When he saw that ad tacked to the telephone pole, faded ink scrawled in shaky cursive, he stared at it for a long moment. Barn needs repairs. Cash paid. Simple, direct. The name Mabel sounded old-fashioned, like the kind of woman who paid in wrinkled bills and offered lemonade in mason jars. He didn't hesitate. There wasn't time for second guesses. Gas was low, the pantry was emptier than he'd admit, and Emily's shoes were too tight again. With a silent prayer and his last gallon of fuel, Travis grabbed his rusted tool belt, slid behind the wheel of his pickup, and turned onto County Road 12, unaware that this dirt path, lined with frost-bitten trees and dying weeds, would lead to something far greater than a paycheck. The first time Travis pulled into the gravel drive, the crunch beneath his tires felt final, like crossing an invisible threshold. The house sat still, almost too still, like time had folded its hands and settled in for a long rest. Shingles curled at the edges like yellowed paper, and the porch sagged under the weight of years. A faded American flag, threadbare but proud, hung above the door. The barn leaned dangerously like an old man mid-fall, its roof partially caved in and the weathered wood eaten away by decades of sun and silence. When Mabel Henderson answered his knock, she didn't offer pleasantries or smiles. She just looked at him like she was weighing bricks and said what needed saying. Her voice was raspy, not from weakness, but from the weight of words rarely spoken. There was no handshake, no warm welcome, just a nod toward the barn and a glance back inside, as if she had no time to waste on ceremony. That suited Travis just fine. He didn't come looking for conversation. He came for work. The first nails he drove into those broken beams rang louder than expected, like they were calling something back to life. The barn didn't just need repairs. It needed resurrection. Travis worked with reverence, hands moving with muscle memory forged in better times. He didn't cut corners. He measured twice, even when no one was watching. And Mabel was always watching. She didn't hover, didn't interfere. Instead, she sat quietly in her porch rocker, notebook on her lap, pencil tapping against the wood. Sometimes she'd hum under her breath, melodies from another decade, forgotten by most but etched into her bones. She rarely spoke, but when she did, it was something sharp, clear, and strangely poignant. Once, as he pried up a rotted plank, she said, "Wood remembers. You treat it right. It holds up through storms." Travis didn't reply, but he remembered it. Emily became a fixture in the garden, her laughter a rare sound that didn't seem out of place there. Mabel taught her how to prune tomatoes, how to spot weeds that looked like flowers. Emily read to her in the afternoons, stories about animals and faraway lands, while Mabel nodded without comment, occasionally scribbling something into her ever-present notebook. There was no declaration of friendship, no obvious bond. But in the quiet hours between hammer strikes and page turns, something unspoken took root, a mutual recognition between the broken and the enduring. They were three people suspended in their own kinds of silence, finding in each other's presence the faintest suggestion of steadiness. Travis never trusted easy answers. He'd lived too long, lost too much. But something about Mabel's smirk that night stuck with him. That half-smile, sharp as barbed wire, didn't match the slow, creaking pace of the woman who spoke in half-sentences and preferred silence to storytelling. He didn't press her when she brushed off the hatch beneath the new floorboards. But from that moment on, the barn stopped being just another job site. It became a question with no clean edges. He started noticing things, not accidents, not coincidences, details that didn't belong on a retired woman's budget. The dining room table, though dulled by dust, was made of hand-carved mahogany, its feet shaped like lion's paws. He recognized the craftsmanship. You didn't work construction for 2 decades and not know the touch of real money. Her bookshelves weren't filled with dog-eared paperbacks. They held gold-leaf tomes, original bindings, and signatures. Emily once pointed to a tiny author's note scribbled in pencil and said, "I think this was written by hand." Travis leaned in. The name was unmistakable. That book alone could cover half a year's rent. Then there was the painting, hung just above the fireplace. Its dusty glass couldn't hide the depth of the brushwork or the signature in the corner. Travis didn't know art, but he knew what it meant when a guy with a name like Hollister Kane made the national news for a 7-figure auction. He'd seen that same signature on Mabel's wall. None of it made sense. She lived like the rest of them, scratch-and-dent fridge, patched-up linoleum, canned soup in the pantry. She didn't flaunt anything, didn't own a TV, wore the same overalls, rotated 3 threadbare flannel shirts. If she had wealth, it was buried deeper than the hatch in that barn. But Travis respected silence, especially the kind that looked chosen, not forced. So he swallowed his questions and went about his work. Until the morning she didn't come out. It was Emily who noticed first, her book unopened on the porch railing. "She's usually waiting," she whispered. Travis knocked. Once, twice, then opened the screen door. The air inside was thick, unmoving. Mabel was slumped in her armchair, face pale and mouth slightly open. One hand dangled toward the carpet. The other clutched a yellowing photo, a young man in uniform, and a crumpled letter stamped with the U.S. Army seal. For the first time since meeting her, Travis felt the weight of a silence that wasn't armor, but grief, long buried, long hidden, and now finally spilling through the cracks. Mabel's stroke came like a thief, quick, uninvited, and cold. She was gone from the porch that day, not just in body, but in presence. The stillness she once wore like a second skin was replaced by hospital machines and the soft beeping of monitors. Her voice, once dry and wry, full of barbed wisdom, was slurred, her hands curled at the edges. Yet her eyes, though slower to follow, still held that same unwavering fire. And Travis, loyal to a fault, never once considered walking away. Each afternoon, he and Emily came bearing warmth where the world had left chill. He cooked simple meals, thick stews, fried eggs with toast edges crisped just right. Emily brought flowers plucked from the roadside or drawn in crayon, setting them gently on the nightstand. But it was the notebooks that anchored Travis, thick with Mabel's dense handwriting, page after page of clipped phrases, family names, crop cycles, maps drawn in pen. At first, they seemed like musings from an aging mind, but the deeper he read, the more he understood. This wasn't idle memory. This was inventory, history, quiet power. Parcel by parcel, name by name, he pieced it together. Mabel Henderson didn't just own the barn and the farmhouse. She owned the land surrounding the county highway, the orchard by Miller's Creek, the fallow soybean fields beyond the church, deeds tucked inside plastic sleeves, surveyor markings with decades-old signatures. He flipped a page and froze, his own name scribbled in her sharp pen, underlined twice. No explanation, just a name, under a column marked integrity. The truth hit him with the slow burn of sunrise. Her quiet had never been empty. It had been deliberate, observant, heavy with judgment. While others rushed to impress or ask for more, Travis never once reached beyond what he'd earned. And she had noticed. The lawyer came on a gray Tuesday, his suit pressed too perfectly for a gravel driveway. He handed Travis a sealed envelope, nodded politely, and left without fanfare. Inside was a letter, written in Mabel's hand, shakier than her notebooks, but no less certain. I watched you rebuild something that mattered to me. You worked like the world was still worth believing in. And that made me believe too. The house, the barn, and 10 acres, they're yours now. So is this check. Build something real. Build it for others. The check was large enough to erase debt, start fresh, dream big. But it was the words that landed deepest. For a man who'd been scraping by with nothing left to give, Mabel had handed him more than land. She had given him a name worth carrying and a future worth building. 6 months was long enough for the wind to shift, for rust to be scrubbed off hope, and for a man like Travis Malone to stand taller than the weight that once bent his back. The newly painted truck bore his name, Malone and Daughter Restoration Co., in bold letters across gleaming steel, not as a boast, but as a quiet declaration. We're still here. We're building something. The lettering wasn't flashy, but the ampersand between his and Emily's names meant everything. It was a promise stitched in paint. Father and daughter, side by side, future forward. The barn, once skeletal and sagging, now stood strong. Sunlight filtered through its high windows, catching dust in golden beams that swirled over sawhorses, stacks of reclaimed wood, and carefully sorted nails. It wasn't just a workspace, it was a cathedral of second chances. Inside, the scent of cedar and linseed oil mingled with the sound of hammers and radio static. Travis moved through it with the ease of a man who finally knew where he belonged. His 3 new hires, Pete, Ramon, and Clay, were men like he'd once been, good-hearted, down on their luck, ready to work. He didn't give them pity, he gave them purpose. Emily had taken to sorting blueprints with the same focus she once gave fairy tales. Her hands, still small but steady, flattened creases with care. "This one's for the baker's porch," she said proudly one morning, pointing to a sketch that bore Travis's penciled notes. She had her mother's eyes and her father's steadiness, and in her presence there was no room for grief, only momentum. Mabel, wrapped in a hand-knit shawl, resumed her throne on the porch. Though her steps were slower now, her spirit remained ironclad. She no longer needed to say much. The town had started whispering her name again, but this time not as a recluse or a mystery. The paper's front-page photo captured her with Travis and Emily beside the barn, a rare smile softening her face. Barn restored, lives rebuilt, the quiet gift of Mabel Henderson. But headlines faded. What stayed was the truth buried beneath the ink. Travis didn't care for accolades. He had seen the worst of himself and clawed his way back with grit and grace. What mattered was that someone had looked past his holes and hollowness, seen the man underneath, and deemed him worthy. Not as a charity case, not as a project, as a builder, as a father, as someone who, given the tools and a little faith, could create something that would last.